Okay, I'm back to handheld, so there will be jiggling of the camera. It took me about an hour to get this first stage of the warping done. You can see that every slot has 2 threads going into it, except for the very last one, which is where I ran out of yarn. That one only has 1 end going through it, and it's tied off at the warping peg. You can also see that I ran out of yarn 8 slots or 16 ends sooner than I had anticipated. That's not that big a deal. It means I'll lose about 1 inch of the width of my finished project, which is fine. It also means that when I do the next stage in warping this loom, which is taking 1 of the 2 threads out of each slot and feeding it through the hole, I can take this opportunity to center my warp again, because I know for a fact that I'm likely to tilt this loom slightly while I'm weaving on it, and so I want the warp centered. So I'm walking you through, again, I know it's really hard to see the warp ends against this grayish carpeting, but there it is. I'm walking you over to see what the warping peg side looks like. So here you can see that all my ends go around this peg except for this very last end, which is tied on. You can also see that I did pretty well keeping my warp length consistent with this stretchy yarn. There's 1 end that's sagging down. It's not going to have that much of an impact. In fact, it looks like it's my last end. Sorry about that. It looks like it's my last end. So you can see that I did pretty well at keeping these warp ends a consistent length, and that is going to pay off big time when I'm weaving. So I should get the full length of my warp that I had planned for, which is great. And if you're wondering how I did all these calculations, I used the warp and weft calculator on Shact's website. It's a free little doodad, and I worked backwards. Normally, you start with, here's how long I want my warp to be, here's the ends per inch I'm using, here's the picks per inch I'm using, and it tells you how many yards you will need. Well, I did that, and then I started playing with the numbers so that I could come up with a warp usage that would come as close as possible to using up all my yarn. And you can see I overshot a little bit because I had already used some of the yarn for that little knitted sample I showed you, plus the woven sample, and then I had a little bit of tangling. And that's okay. We can adjust very, very easily. I'm showing you this this warp yarn in a very bright light, perhaps insanely bright, but it gives you a sense of the very subtle variations in color that play across it, which is what made me fall in love with this yarn in the first place, before I realized, oh, I don't want to knit another sweater from lace weight yarn. So now I'm ready for the next step, which is threading the holes in my rigid heddle. And again, I will do that. I will beam this warp, wrap it around the warp beam with corrugated cardboard to separate the layers. And when I have wound enough warp so that there's maybe this much left in front of the rigid heddle, I will be able to, re-thread the heddle and tie on to the front beam, front apron beam, and then I can start weaving.